Hi everyone, so about an hour ago I put that video up on recording video with the E-M1 Mark II in harsh light, just to kind of compare what, Casey got with the E-M5 Mark III. And I think for the most part I've mitigated some of that a little bit, but you guys can watch that video and judge for yourself. But one of the questions I asked about was getting auto ISO in manual mode for video, because I could not find any setting that would allow me to shoot in auto ISO with manual settings for video. I remember seeing something about someone had mentioned Peter had a hack for that, so Too Old for Toys, I think, was kind enough to point me to that video. But yeah, that doesn't work. When you are in video mode and you shoot in manual, where you set the shutter speed, aperture, and ISO, there's no way to get auto ISO. And if you were to do any exposure comp, you have to do it by adjusting the aperture or the shutter speed, but you can't really do auto ISO when you're in video mode. And the hack was supposedly to just put the camera into a photo mode like manual mode and set that for auto ISO. And then, when you hit the record button, you'll have full manual with auto ISO. But that's just not the case. What actually happens, and I did a series on video settings for Olympus cameras where I did talk about that. But what actually happens when you push the shutter button or the record button when you're in a photo mode, the camera records the video in program mode. So you have no control. It takes complete control over the exposure if you hit the record button while you're in a photo mode. But only the exposure. You can still set like picture modes like monotone. You can apply art filters and anything to do with the color or creative things you can do. But when it comes to exposure, if you hit the record button in photo mode, like PS, A, or M, it's going to record the video in program mode. So with that said, I had to figure out a way I could prove that theory. So I'm recording this video with all of the camera settings being displayed, right? So you can see everything. So let me go ahead and show you, because right now I am shooting in video in manual mode where I set the shutter speed. It's like at 1600. I'm at f2, and I set the ISO to 200. And as you can see, what I want you to pay attention to when we do this comparison is primarily the background. Look at the bokeh in the background. How blurry that is right now. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the camera into a photo mode manual and set up the auto ISO. And then you'll see that, this background comes into focus because the camera adjusted the aperture. It didn't adjust the ISO. Well, you'll see what I mean. Hold on. Alright, so now I'm in a photo manual mode, as you can see from the little M here in the camera. And I just hit the record button. And as you can see, hopefully, like right here, this tree behind me is now more in focus, right? It's not as blurred out. So what happened is the camera's now taken over control of the exposure and adjusted the shutter speed, the aperture, and the ISO. Because it's in program mode where it controls all of those things. And so this little hack, I appreciate that, but yeah, I wanted to test it on E-M1 Mark II because my video tutorials were based on the E-M10 Mark II or maybe the Pen F, I can't remember now, but it still applies to the Olympus E-M1 Mark II, where if you hit the record button in a photo mode, it's going to record the video in program mode. Now I'll prove it to you another way. Hold on, okay? So what I'm doing, I'm just hitting the play button, and you get some EXIF data when you're in the camera, and you can see it clearly says P mode down in the bottom right with auto white balance. It doesn't give me any other information like aperture and shutter speed or ISO, but when you're in P mode, the camera definitely takes care of all of the exposure settings, including auto ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. All right, and the other thing that someone had mentioned is they sorry. You know, the other thing someone had mentioned was about using spot metering or center weighted metering while in video mode. And in video mode, you really don't have control over that either. It's always going to go into ESP mode. So that's why you have to really dial in exposure comp, like in the previous video that I did, to adjust for the exposure that you want to get. And to demonstrate that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you in photo mode with spot metering on this tree versus, say, this background here, and you'll see a big difference in the exposure as the spot meter moves. But when I do the same angles in video, you're not going to see that dramatic change like you do with a true spot metering. And the other challenge with spot metering, even if it was available in video, is it turns off face detect. So if spot metering was available in video mode, then you would lose face detect in the autofocus. But let me go ahead and demonstrate the metering mode in video. All right, so let me get out of video mode here and go ahead and take a couple of pictures with spot metering. So first thing I need to do is, I'm still in manual mode, is go into the super control panel and change the ESP metering to spot metering. And you can see that face detect turned off. And if you missed it, let me go back and show you right there. Face detect is now off whenever you go into spot metering. And let me just take a quick picture here, and you'll very quickly see the highlights get blown out right there. But let's move on. Let me go ahead and pan over to this brighter area, and you can see how the exposure changes with the spot meter. And if I take a picture here, you'll notice that the the shadows get crushed to black, as indicated by the blue blinking. Now let me go ahead and turn on the video mode and start recording and do the same panning. And I didn't change anything in the super control panel. You would think we should still be in spot metering, but you can see that we're not. The camera is recording in P mode, which is ESP, and that's the only mode available in video for metering is ESP. Because you'll see that the exposure hardly changes at all when I pan, left to right and back right to left. Okay everyone, so hopefully I was able to answer those questions about exposure in video mode and dispel some myths maybe, or thinking that shooting the video in a photo mode will get you to auto ISO in manual mode, and that's just not the case that I can tell. And I'm not perfect. Maybe I made a mistake in my methodology, but just let me know in the comments below what you think, and if you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to ask. And also I'm doing a live streaming today at 3:45, so join me there as well.